The barn stood crooked on the edge of a forgotten field, surrounded by brittle weeds and the skeletal remains of old farm tools. Its roof sagged, patches of sunlight streaming through gaps in the wood, casting golden shafts across the dust-laden floor. Inside, amid broken planks and scattered straw, lay Buster, a brown and white mutt with ears too big for his head and eyes too wise for his age. He was quiet now. The first few days, he barked and howled, scratched at the door with his blunt nails, whimpered for someone, anyone, to come back. But no one came. His ribs pressed against his thinning coat, his once strong bark had faded to a dry rasp. Flies buzzed around the tin pail in the corner that once held water but was now tipped over, empty, forgotten like everything else in the barn. Buster didn't know why they'd stopped coming. The boy, especially. The one who used to sneak him scraps when his father wasn't looking. He remembered his warm hands, the way he'd ruffle Buster's ears and whisper, "Good boy. You're my best friend." Then one day, they'd all left in a hurry. Voices loud and angry, car doors slamming, and silence. Eternal, heavy silence. Days passed, though Buster lost count. Hunger was a constant ache, but thirst was worse, his tongue dry as cotton, his breath shallow. He'd started dreaming more, slipping between dreams and waking, confusing the real with the imagined. Sometimes he heard the boy's voice. Sometimes he imagined a stream of fresh water trickling through the barn floor. Other times, he simply lay still, too weak to move. Then came the rain. Not a storm, just a whisper of droplets that crept in through the cracked roof. Buster lifted his head, ears twitching. He dragged himself toward the leak, licked the muddy water from the floor, eyes closing with a groan of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something, enough to keep him holding on. He didn't know how long he'd been there when the footsteps came. They were cautious, slow. A shuffling kind of movement, as if the person feared the barn might collapse. Buster's ears perked up, though he didn't dare move. The door creaked open, and sunlight poured in, blinding after so long in the gloom. "Hello?" a voice called out, uncertain. Buster didn't recognize it. Female, older. Not the boy. Oh my God? The woman stepped inside, her boots crunching over straw and debris. Her name was Annie Wren, a volunteer with a rural animal rescue program. She'd gotten a call from a local realtor who had plans to demolish the barn and wanted to ensure there were no strays inside. She expected mice, maybe raccoons. Not this. She knelt beside Buster, taking in his bony frame, his sad, hopeful eyes. She reached out, and Buster flinched, then stayed still. She gently touched his side, and he let out a soft, breathy sigh. "Oh, sweet boy, you've been through hell, haven't you?" It was the first kind voice he'd heard in what felt like forever. Annie didn't waste time. She radioed the rescue team while carefully lifting Buster into a blanket. He was feather light, too light, his body limp, though he tried to wag his tail. Just a twitch. The ride to the shelter was quiet, save for the sound of the tires on gravel and Annie humming a lullaby under her breath. She kept a hand on him the whole time. "You're gonna be okay, buddy. You're safe now." The shelter was small, nestled in a nearby town where everyone knew everyone's name. The vet, Dr. Kelly, was waiting when they arrived. He ran tests, started fluids, and gently cleaned the grime from Buster's fur. "He's lucky," Dr. Kelly said, adjusting his glasses. "Another day or two in." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, Buster had clean water, real food, and a soft blanket. He slept for hours, maybe days, waking only to eat or lift his head when someone entered the room. He wasn't ready to trust again, but something in Annie's voice made his ears perk every time she came in. The days turned to weeks. Slowly, Buster gained weight. His fur began to shine. His eyes, once dull and vacant, now watched with curiosity. He never barked, never whined, but he listened, always listened. Annie visited him every day, talked to him like a person. Sometimes about the shelter, sometimes about her life, often about nothing at all. "You're a good listener," she'd say. "Better than most people I know." One day, she brought someone new. "Buster, this is Daniel," she said gently. "He's a friend, a veteran. He's been through a lot." Daniel was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held the same haunted look Buster once wore. He didn't speak at first. just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the dog. Buster stared back. Then he walked over and sat beside Daniel's feet, pressing his side against the man's boot. Just that. Quiet, steady presence. Daniel blinked. "He's calm," he murmured. "Really calm. He's good at reading people," Annie said softly. "He knows when someone needs a friend." Daniel crouched down, looked Buster in the eyes, and for a long time, they just stared at each other. A silent understanding passed between them. That was the moment everything began to change. The air in Daniel's apartment was heavy. Not with smoke or clutter, but with silence, the kind that creeps in and settles like dust on forgotten furniture. He'd lived alone since returning from overseas, and aside from Annie's occasional visits, no one came around. The walls were bare, the blinds always drawn. His life had shrunk into the smallest, quietest corner he could find. Until Buster came home with him. Daniel wasn't sure why he said yes. Maybe it was the way Buster leaned against him in the shelter, or how he never barked, never demanded. He was just there. Like a companion who understood the weight of ghosts without needing the stories behind them. The first night, Buster slept at the foot of Daniel's bed. The second night, he moved closer. By the end of the week, his head was resting against Daniel's chest, breathing slow and steady like a metronome guiding a broken man back to rhythm. Daniel hadn't slept that well in years. The VA had tried everything, therapy, medication, group sessions, but nothing quieted the flashbacks like Buster did. There was something about the dog's presence, the way he'd nudge Daniel's hand when he felt the tension rising. How he'd sit beside him during those 3 a.m. battles with invisible enemies. It was like Buster knew. Daniel didn't ask questions, he just accepted it. They started a routine. Mornings were slow. Coffee for Daniel, kibble for Buster. Then walks. Short ones at first, just around the block. Daniel still flinched at sudden noises. Still scanned every alley and rooftop like he was back on patrol. But Buster never reacted. He walked steady, ears perked, eyes forward. Always alert, but never afraid. Daniel learned to follow his lead. Some neighbors began to notice. A woman walking her twins in a stroller gave a tight smile one morning. A kid on a scooter waved. Daniel, surprised, found himself nodding back. Buster didn't just calm Daniel, he connected him. One day, Annie called. "I was talking to a therapist friend," she said, "and she thinks Buster could qualify as an official emotional support animal. Thought you might want to consider it." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Buster, who was sprawled across the rug, chewing lazily on a frayed rope toy. "I thought he already was," Daniel said quietly. The paperwork wasn't difficult. Annie helped with the process. The VA signed off on it without hesitation. They'd seen enough cases like Daniel's, enough to know that healing often came in unexpected forms. And Buster was extraordinary. He passed every temperament test. Never startled, never growled. Once, during a loud event at the local community center, he calmly laid at Daniel's feet while chaos erupted around them. Kids screaming, balloons popping, a chair crashing to the ground. Buster didn't even flinch. He looked up at Daniel, blinked slowly, and yawned. That moment made Daniel laugh. Actually laugh. It felt foreign at first, like dusting off a part of himself he thought had withered and died somewhere in the desert. But there it was. Real. Whole. Daniel started volunteering with Annie at the shelter on weekends. He wasn't ready for crowds or small talk, but he could fix broken fences. Replace roof shingles. Carry bags of dog food. He brought Buster with him every time, and the other animals responded to the dog with surprising calm. Even the feral ones seemed to settle when Buster walked by. Word began to spread. People came to the shelter just to see the miracle dog, who'd survived weeks alone in a barn, only to become the calm in someone else's storm. Annie joked about writing a book. Daniel just shook his head. "He's not a miracle," he said one afternoon while hammering a loose board. "He just listens better than most people." But deep down, Daniel knew Buster was something rare. There were still bad nights. Dreams that woke Daniel in a cold sweat. Sounds that twisted his insides before he even realized he'd reacted. But every time, Buster was there. A warm weight beside him. A grounding touch. One night, Daniel had the worst episode since coming home. He woke screaming, fists clenched, heart pounding like a war drum. He barely remembered diving to the floor, convinced he was under attack. But Buster didn't bark, didn't panic. He walked over and laid beside him, placing his head gently on Daniel's back, breathing slow and steady. Eventually, Daniel matched that rhythm. He cried for the first time in years. In the days that followed, something shifted. He began to open the blinds, let in light, started a small garden in the window box, a few herbs, some flowers. Just enough to bring color into the room. When Annie stopped by, she noticed immediately. "New plants?" she asked. Daniel nodded, figured the dog deserved a nicer view. She smiled. "Maybe you both do." He didn't disagree. One afternoon, Daniel took Buster to the park. It was busier than usual, families picnicking, kids tossing frisbees, joggers weaving through the trees. Daniel felt the old pressure in his chest start to build, then looked at Buster, who was sitting calmly beside him, panting softly. He took a deep breath, then another, and started walking. They passed a bench where a man sat alone in a wheelchair. His eyes were distant, haunted. Daniel knew that look. He hesitated, then changed direction. Buster followed without question. As they neared, the man glanced up, then down at Buster. His brow furrowed. "What kind of dog is that?" he asked quietly. Daniel looked at Buster, then back at the man. "The kind that saves your life without saying a word." They sat together for a long time, saying little, letting silence be something shared instead of suffered. And Buster lay between them, as steady as always. Fall arrived slowly, draping the town in amber light and crisp air. The leaves outside Daniel's apartment turned shades of copper and flame, drifting down onto the sidewalk in a quiet cascade. Change was in the air, not just in the season, but in Daniel's life. He stood at the window more often now. Coffee in one hand, Buster curled up at his feet. The garden box was thriving, lavender, thyme, a stubborn little marigold that bloomed late. He hadn't named the plants, but he talked to them sometimes. Buster always listened. One morning, a letter arrived. Daniel almost didn't open it. It came from the VA, and those letters rarely brought good news. But curiosity won out. He slit the envelope with a dull butter knife and unfolded the single sheet inside. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been approved to participate in our community peer support program, focused on helping veterans transition back into civilian life with the aid of certified emotional support animals." He stared at the page, rereading it 3 times. Buster watched from the couch, tail giving one slow thump. It had been Annie's idea. "You and Buster could help other vets," she'd said over coffee weeks ago. "You've been where they are. You don't need to fix them. Just sit with them, show them it's survivable." Daniel wasn't sure. He was barely holding himself together some days. But then again, that was the point. Maybe surviving was enough. Their first official session took place in a community center on the far edge of town. Daniel wore jeans and a flannel shirt. No uniform, no medals, just himself. Buster wore a simple blue vest with white embroidery, emotional support animal. There were 6 other veterans in the room, all strangers, all carrying the same invisible weight. Some spoke, some didn't. Daniel didn't force it. He just introduced Buster and shared a little of their story. The barn, the rescue, the long nights, the healing. He didn't get far before his throat caught. But Buster leaned into him, and Daniel kept going. By the end of the session, 2 of the men were kneeling on the floor, scratching behind Buster's ears. One had tears in his eyes. "This dog, he's different," someone whispered. Daniel nodded. He knows what it's like to be left behind. And what it means to be brought back. Word spread quickly. Within a month, Daniel was doing 3 sessions a week, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in groups. Buster became a fixture. People came for him as much as for the sessions. And he never disappointed. He could find the quietest person in the room and sit beside them like they were the most important soul in the world. He didn't need words. He was enough, just as he was. So was Daniel. One evening, after a long session with a young woman fresh out of service, shaking and silent and ashamed, Daniel sat on the community center steps, Buster by his side, head resting on his knee. The sky above them was streaked with lavender and gold, like someone had taken a paintbrush to the clouds. Annie joined them, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel, then sat. "I've been thinking," she said after a few minutes. Oh, Daniel replied with a grin. She nudged him with her shoulder. I want to nominate Buster for the National Hero Dog Award. Daniel laughed. Come on, Annie. I'm serious. He saved your life. And now he's helping save others. That's the definition of a hero. Daniel looked down at Buster. The dog glanced up, licked his hand, and let out a soft huff. He doesn't care about awards, Daniel said. No, Annie agreed. But people should know his story. It might inspire someone to rescue a dog. Or get help. Or just not give up. Daniel grew quiet. He stared into the sunset, memories flickering through his mind, hot sand and sirens, screaming and smoke, the cold floor of his apartment, the weight of a dog's head on his chest. Okay, he said softly. Let's tell his story. The nomination made waves. Annie wrote the application, attaching photos and excerpts from Daniel's journal entries. The shelter sent in the original rescue report. Dr. Kelly, the vet, submitted medical records and a letter attesting to Buster's resilience. The VA added their endorsement. By spring, Buster was named a finalist. The ceremony was in D.C., fancy suits, speeches, cameras. Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to go, but the other veterans from the group chipped in for travel costs, saying they'd never forgive him if he didn't represent them. So he went. Buster, of course, went too. They walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. The announcer read from a card. For surviving weeks alone without food or water, for healing a soldier's broken heart, and for bringing comfort to countless veterans across the country, we present this year's Hero Dog Award to Buster. The applause was thunderous. Buster, unfazed, sat calmly at Daniel's side. Daniel accepted the plaque. His voice trembled at the microphone. I thought I was beyond saving, he said. Thought the war had taken everything that mattered. But then I met a dog who'd also been forgotten. Left behind. He didn't need words to heal me. Just time. And trust. And presence. He paused, eyes shining. If you ever doubt that something small can save something big, remember this dog. Back home, life returned to its quiet rhythm. But things were different now. Daniel was different. He taught workshops. Helped train other emotional support animals. He even adopted a second rescue, a little terrier named Max who followed Buster like a shadow. The apartment, once so silent, now echoed with life. And every night, when the world slowed down and the darkness came, Daniel would sit on the floor with Buster curled up beside him, Max snoring in the corner, and feel a peace he never thought he'd find again. Not the kind of peace that erases the past, but the kind that holds it gently and says, you made it through. Because in the end, it wasn't the therapy or the medication or the speeches that saved him. It was a dog, once left to die in a collapsing barn, who chose to live, and in doing so, taught others how to live too.